6th. Every year it gets bigger and bigger, so if you've been to, well, I'm sure most of you have been to Wagner Grist Mill or been to Heller Homestead or been to our schoolhouse, every year we tend to add more things, and it's really a big event in our township, and we do hope that you'll all come out and support us this year. It's going to be 9 to 2 at the 2 historical sites in town here. And then for us, the schoolhouse that's out further in the country, it's going to be 10 to 2 because it takes you a while for people to work their way out there. So we will be open from 10 to 2. And we do hope that you'll all come and join us. And this year we're adding a passport. So if you visit all 3 venues and all 3 sites, you will have a chance to win a big basket that's being put together at the grist mill, and it'll have things from the 3 historical sites, and it also will have things from the local merchants will be in it. All right? And rather than go over all the details, their brochure, their flyers back there, pick up a flyer, and it's also on Facebook and online. All right? So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Sally because I did not live in the Lehigh Valley when Hess's was open. So I don't, the only thing I can tell you about Hess's, the only words that come to mind are strawberry pie and elegance.
Is your strawberry
And
pie?
that's, so,
Strawberry pie out of the best that you were here today?
oh, is there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's the good
Could we compete? No, from what I've heard. So I am going to turn the meeting now over to Sally Murphy, who has told me many, many Hess stories, and she's going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you. I'm really honored that she let me introduce you because I think the world of both of you. I just wanted to say that Hess has been a really big part of my life. I love working at the store. My husband was vice president of operations and planning for 38 years and was involved in building 48 stores while he was there. Thanks to Kurt's father, my son's room, the 4 walls were covered with black and white photos of everything that happened at Hess's. He has a really extensive collection of not only celebrities that were there, but different times when things were happening exciting at the store. I'd just like to read this. Kurt Zwickl and Frank Whelan will give a presentation on the history of Hess's department store. Kurt Zwickl's father, William, was the department store's photographer from 1953 to 1981. As Hess's photographer, William was responsible for capturing some of the most significant moments in the store's history. His contribution to Hess's growth and fashion presentations is immeasurable. Zwickl and Whelan are co-authors of the book Hess's Department Store, a book that highlighted William R. Zwickl's photographs of Hess's. Zwickl was a state representative for 11 years, past chairman of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, and was president of the Allentown Economic Development Corporation from 1996 to 2003. He now is executive director of the Schuylkill River National and State Heritage Area. Whelan wrote feature articles and the Ask Frank column in the Morning Call between 1981 to 2006. He currently writes a blog for television channel WFMZ-TV. We are really, really honored to have both of you with us. Thank you.
Kurt and I are very honored to be here this evening, and thank you folks very much for having us. We've decided for this evening to kind of divide it up into two sections. I'll be talking about the early days and the founding of Hess's, how it came to be, Max Hess's father, the origin of the store, and some interesting things in that area. And Kurt will be talking about the golden age of Hess's, who we all remember Max Hess Jr. when he was in charge, and when Kurt's dad was the photographer there at the store for many, many years. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about Hess's was that the origins of it go way back to Max Hess Sr. and his brother Charles. Both of them were immigrants from Germany. They came over here, a very interesting early history. Max Hess and his brother Charles were basically orphans. Their mother was in Germany. She didn't know exactly what to do with them, but she had a sister who lived in America. So in the 1870s, she sent them over to America, to the quaint little town of Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and there they grew up. Max Hess Sr. went to the Cooper Union. Does anybody know what the Cooper Union is? Yes, the Cooper Union was a school that was established for poor kids, immigrant kids, who were very bright but couldn't afford a college. And it was established by a man named Peter Cooper. Max Hess Sr. was later to talk about how that influenced his life and how he began to see the point of having people who would, when he made his money, be generous with the community. So, Max Hess Sr. and his brother Charles were here in America, in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and the year was 1893. In the year 1893, there was an economic depression, and their store was going out of business. So Max Hess Sr. and Charles Hess were trying to figure out, what exactly do we do? We need to go someplace. We need to create another kind of store. But where will we go? What will we do? So Charles said to Max, he said, and this story, by the way, used to appear in the morning call just about every year that Hess's was in operation in its early days. Charles Hess, Max's brother, said, Max, what we need to do is go to Atlantic City. Atlantic City is the future. We could open a store in Atlantic City. It's booming. There are all those hotels. There are all those people going there to the shore. Atlantic City is the future. But Max said, Charles, I don't know. I don't think so. There's just something about that that doesn't strike me as right. I'm going to look elsewhere. So on a day in 1896, Max Hess Sr. was in Easton. He had come to Easton as a part of a firemen's convention, a volunteer firemen's convention. They were being held in Easton. And so he got there, and he thought, well, maybe I ought to take a look around this area. What do I know about eastern Pennsylvania? Where should I go? What should I look for? So he got on a train. First, he took the train to Bethlehem. He looked around Bethlehem, and he didn't see what he was looking for. Then he got on the train again, and he took the train to Allentown. He got off the train in Allentown, got off the steps, walked up the hill, Hamilton Street Hill, either that or he took a streetcar. We're not exactly sure which. But when he got to the top of the hill, he began to walk down the center of the street, and he looked on either side. Gradually, he saw that the traffic was moving west. Things didn't be going in that general direction. And as he did, he noticed something. There, at the corner of 9th and Hamilton, was a very large building called the Grand Central Hotel. And that hotel was a fairly large structure, but there was a nice retail space in the bottom of it. And then he looked up the street further, and he saw that there was just lumber yards, but one thing he did notice, the streetcar line. And the streetcar line was going that way. Development was headed west in Allentown. This would be a perfect location to have a store at 9th and Hamilton. Now, this is 1896, and a lot of people in Allentown said, no, you're crazy. That'll never happen. Retail in Allentown always stops at 8th Street. It's always stopped there. It's never gotten any further than that. That's where it's going to go. There's the hotel there. That's it. That's what's going to happen. So he said, well, you know, I still think this Allentown has potential. So he went back to Perth Amboy, talked to Brother Charles, and said, Charles, I have an idea. We're not going to Atlantic City at all. And Charles said, we're not? And he said, no, we're going to Allentown. And February of 1896, they opened a store in Allentown. Now, in this hotel. Now, you have to understand that in those days, advertising and selling and merchandising was very simple, especially around here. People were very conservative. They didn't like changes. They didn't like a lot of differences. And basically what they did was, if you went into a store, there would be bolts of cloth. You'd go in, you'd get a bolt of cloth, maybe take some home, woman maybe make a dress, something like that. But that's the way that kind of retailing was. On the morning of February 19th of 1897, Max Hess opens his store by hiring the Allentown Band out front, playing Sousa marches. And everyone is going, what is this? Why? What is going on here? This is just not done. And gradually, people came into the store, and they began to look around, and began to see things that wasn't really all that much different than what existed before, but what was clear already, right from the start, that Max Hess Sr. already conceived and had a plan that would be in favor of merchandising that no one else had thought of. People suddenly saw the store was a growth opportunity. So this Grand Central Hotel, which by the way was, as I say, a fairly large building, gradually they began to annex one section of the building after another, until by 1902, the gentleman who owned the Grand Central Hotel, Victor Barger, sold the whole building out to Max Hess Sr., and they had a large, large building. And they were also doing something that a lot of other people had never tried to do before at Allentown. They sort of tried it, but not to a great extent. What Max Hess saw was advertising. You had to advertise. And advertise he did extensively in the local newspapers. And that gave him a base for a lot of innovative and creative things that he began to do. One of the things he noticed when he first opened the store was that people were going to the store, they'd go and get something, and then they'd go out to lunch at somebody else's restaurant. Max Hess Sr. said, this is not a good idea. When they're outside the store, they're not buying anything that I want them to buy, so they're distracted. But a lot of stores had restaurants, those little things, nothing spectacular. In 1909, Max Hess Sr. decided to create a splash in more ways than one. He built in a restaurant and had a trout stream flowing through the center. And the trout would come down, and apparently you would go down and pick the trout you wanted for lunch. Now, needless to say, everybody thought, this is a little bit outrageous, don't you think? This is Allentown, after all. This is a little too New York. What are you doing here, Max? Why would people be interested in this? But they all came, and it worked. The thing that worked mostly is people didn't leave the store. They stopped there, they ate lunch, and they stayed at the store and went off later to do what they needed to get more shopping. So that was an essential thing. Another thing he did was to create something that everybody said was crazy. He talked his brother Charles into the creation of the French Room. This is the year 1912. Allentown is not exactly the most fashion-conscious city in the world, but suddenly Max's brother Charles is going to Paris, and he's writing about all the fashion designs in Paris, and he's sending word back, and he's shipping French fashions to Allentown. And this was just so unusual at the time. This was so interesting to people, but it was just so unusual that Allentown was becoming a fashion center. This was something people just were not used to. So this was kind of innovation and creative kind of things that were already taking place in Hess's long before Max Hess Jr., Max Hess Senior's son, was involved. But it's fascinating to think about that as gradually the years went by, the store expanded and expanded. Did you ever notice when you were in Hess's, you would go up and down, and up and down? That was because they annexed one building after another. So what you were doing when you were doing up and down was you were going from the floor of one building to a next that had been added onto. By the time of the 1920s, if you had gone to see Hess's, what you would have seen was this big, long Victorian-style building, painted white, that was really just a collection of a variety of other things. So by 1921, Hess's was already was a thriving business, and then there was a tragedy. Max Hess Sr. died tragically young of pneumonia. And with that, the store, although it didn't really, I'm just saying it fell apart, it lacked that creative imagination, that creative thrust, that creative drive that Max Hess Sr. had. His brother Charles tried to carry that on. He did so for a while, but then he died in 1928, and when the Depression hit in 1929, the store began to wobble. And that's when Max Hess Jr. stepped into the role. Kurt?
Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome.
Thanks to all of you for being here this evening. Max Hess Jr. Was the person that probably all of you in the room knew in terms of the owner of the store. Max Hess was a superb motivator, he was a superb merchandiser, and he understood, perhaps even more than selling goods, he understood public relations. And through the 40s and then into the 50s, the 1950s, we witnessed here in Allentown what Frank referred to. I'm quoting Frank, the historian. This is not my quote, but I love it. It was the golden age of Hess's department store. There was one promotion after the next. The promotions followed weekly. There was always something exciting going on in the store, and it was entertaining to visit this department store. And I see some people nodding because you've been entertained. My father worked at the Morning Call as a photographer. He was a self-taught photographer. He was hired by the Evening Chronicle in 1939, worked for a few years, then went into the 8th Air Force, so was a photographer in England for 4 years with the Air Force, came back, returned to the Morning Call. And in the 1950s, 1953, he received a phone call one day from Wayne Holden Sr., who was the sales promotion manager for Hess's, and he said, Will, they used to call him Will. They did, I didn't, he was my dad. He said they asked me to come up. Max Hess wanted to meet me. Now there were probably a good dozen photographers on the staff of the Morning Call, the Call Chronicle newspapers, but my father had relationships with Wayne Holden, Max and Maggie Levine, a name that's familiar to a lot of old timers, and some of the other people that were working at the store at the time. And they said, look, Hess really wants to put together some public relations, and we need a photographer. So my father was like, well, you know, I'm enjoying my work at the Morning Call, I like this, but there was a carrot attached to the end of this stick, and the carrot was, well, how about a house out on 27th Street in the west end of Allentown? And what Hess did was, the people that worked for him that he needed close at hand all lived close by. So my parents moved from the little Cape Cod in Hamilton Park to a very nice house on North 27th Street, and Hess paid a good chunk of the mortgage to have them move there. Maggie Levine lived at 27 Ott and Greenleaf. Wayne Holden lived 4 blocks from Max's house at 24th or 23rd in Livingston, and Hess's home was up on the top of the hill at 27th and Livingston. The big white house that occupied pretty much a whole square block in the city. It's still there. The home next to it that is now privately owned was where servants at one point lived in that period. There was a swimming pool and tennis courts, and all kinds of events happened at this house. Sonny and Cher entertained, and many of the other celebrities that came into the house were there. Hess would fly in palm trees every summer to plant, and of course by the first frost they were dead, and they would dig them out, and the following year they would bring new ones in and plant them again. So it was like having an experience living in Florida. So my father joins Hess's staff, and he comes in, and the 1950s was the age of television. Everybody was watching television, so everybody knew all the cowboy shows that were on TV in the 50s. And all of these people came to Hess's. Clint Walker, who played Cheyenne, James Garner, Buzz Maverick, Chuck Connors, the rifleman, Lorne Green and his whole team from Bonanza. All these people were there. There's a great photograph in my father's book that I'll talk about a little bit, of Lorne Green and Dan Blocker, kind of like this, eyeing up this strawberry pie in the patio restaurant. And of course, both of them probably could have eaten the whole pie by themselves, but we're not sure what they ordered, but I bet you they tasted it. The Heartthrobs were there, Troy Donahue and Rock Hudson. Oh, everyone went crazy over these guys. Lassie actually had lunch in the patio restaurant. That's right, Lassie the dog. Lassie was there. And of course, what my father, what the Morning Call considered after the fact to be one of the finest photographs of the century. They entered it into some contest, and it was selected as one of the top 100 photographs of the century. Was a picture of George Reeves, the original Superman, serving salad to the hostesses in the patio restaurant. They're there in their patio clothing, and Reeves is dishing out the salad to the ladies. One person that Hess wanted and couldn't get was Fess Parker. Everybody know who Fess Parker was?
Sure.
Yes, Walt Disney's Davy Crockett. I'm sure you could all sing the song, because I did. And Frank said, I have to tell this story.
Yes, definitely.
We lived at the bottom of the hill where Max Hess lived on, at 27th, just off of Greenleaf. So Hess was a block and a half away. He went home by our house every day. And I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I've got my coonskin cap on, my Davy Crockett hat, and I'm playing between the sidewalk and the curb. There was a grassy patch, and I'm playing there on the ground doing something, and this car pulls up, and this man said to me, where'd you get that hat? And I said, oh, my father bought it for me at Hess's. And he smiled and he said, very good, and he pulled away. And then my mother happened to be up on the porch. She witnessed this, and she called me up and she said, what did that man, what did he say to you? And I told her, and she said, well, you know who that was? And I said, no. And she said, well, that was Mr. Hess. So you said the right thing. Now, later on, when I was in junior high school, I had a very good friend, my friend Pete Moggio, lived up the street. His family owned the Moggio Silk Mills in Allentown. And Pete had an uncle that worked at Lay's. And we would go downtown and we would shop on Saturdays. That's where everybody went. And one day I came home with a Lay's bag. And the first thing my mother said, I sure hope Mr. Hess didn't see you come in the house. So there was a lot of loyalty here, and it ran deep. You know, if you were either a Lay's shopper or you were a Hess's shopper, and if you went to the other side, you were a traitor. So I learned at about 8th grade that I better be careful with what I do. So Hess's he would bring these cowboys in, the movie stars were in on a Saturday morning. They would fill the store. They would run ads in the Morning Call saying that you could see Troy Donahue or Rock Hudson or Clint Walker, and people would come in. They would get their autographs. My father and his staff of 3 or 4 photographers would take dozens and dozens of pictures, and then they would give these away to people that they knew in the store. So this was part of the PR effort. People actually got a photograph, and if they had a chance, that they would send it off to the studios, and these photographs would come back autographed by these famous movie stars. So it was all about the experience of going to Hess's, and of course they didn't just come to see these people. They bought stuff while they were there, and that was the whole purpose. I saw a helicopter fly over the fairgrounds, and Santa Claus jumped out and he parachuted down into the racetrack. That was a way to see Santa Claus, having him come out of a helicopter. I'm sorry, the helicopter landed. The other one, the first time I saw it, was the plane circled over. We're all there, and the the Santa Claus jumped out of the airplane into the studio. To the infield. The next year, the helicopter showed up, and he got off of the helicopter, and it was the North Pole Express, and so he came right from there. Any other store would just announce, hey, our Santa Claus is in the 4th floor, but not Hess. He wanted to take advantage of the holidays, and you knew that stuff was on sale. Hess also knew how to get headlines. One morning, the morning call read, Hess to purchase PP&L building. Now, maybe some of you remember this, but this was only half-hearted. He said that he had plans to put a revolving restaurant on the top of PP&L, and he was going to move some offices in there, and the store was going to have retail on the 1st floor. And he had big plans. He paid an architect to come up with something catchy, and that's really all it was. It was a newspaper headline. There was no interest. I'm not sure what he would have done if PP&L would have said, well, here it is. But it was a headline, and everything was happening at 9th and Hamilton when Hess was in charge. Another headline was helicopter down on 27th Street. Hess had some event in his home, and somebody was ferried in and out with a helicopter, and they hit either a wire or a tree taking off, and it crashed. I don't believe anybody was hurt, but I was home at the time. I was probably in high school or college, and I get a phone call, and, where's your father? I said, well, he's up in Massachusetts. They're vacationing. They should be home at some point. Well, you tell him to get up here as soon as you can. We need these photographs. So he was within the hour, as it would be, and he took photographs of the helicopter that crashed. Another headline was kangaroo loose in West End. Hess had a kangaroo in his backyard, and they were entertaining some kids, some kind of an event, and the kangaroo got out of the fence, and I think the police had to come in and net the kangaroo to take care of that. What was legendary in the store, and I want to show of hands, have any of you ever been to a cleanup? Did you ever go to a cleanup sale at Hess? Okay, fine. So cleanups were legendary. Well, they promoted them. They had big Sunday advertisements, full-page ads about the cleanup, and they'd give you the hours and tell you when it's going to be. And my uncle's brother got a TV at a cleanup for a penny. And there was only one, and it was up on the 5th floor. And he slept out in the 9th Street entrance to the store the night before. He went down on Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and he was in there, and he had a map rooted out in his mind. He was going to go in, turn right, the staircase here goes straight up, and the TV's in the back corner. He knew the exact route he was going to run, and he was in good shape, and he got the TV. And it was sort of legendary in our family that he wasn't a blood relative of us. He was my uncle's brother. But that was an interesting story about the cleanup sales. One of the best ads that was ever placed in the morning call was Lady Godiva on a white horse on Hamilton Street. There's this beautiful white horse, this woman that appeared naked with long blonde hair on the horse, and there's no one on Hamilton Street, not a car, not a pedestrian, nothing. And this is a full-page, back-page ad in the morning call. And the reason no one was there is they were all inside Hess's at the cleanup. That was the bottom line of the story. Now, the history of the photograph is it was really 2 photographs. One was taken of Hamilton Street at 5 a.m. in the morning, about a week before, as the sun was coming up, sun's working its way up Hamilton Street. There was one car down maybe around 7th and Hamilton parked on the side, and they were able to airbrush that out and remove that. And the photograph of the woman on the horse was taken at a farm, and she was wearing a body stocking. So it's, but yet everybody thought, wow, look at this, so, and it caught people's attention. So he was a master at advertising as well as promotion. Now, my personal cleanup story was when I was at college, I worked on the 4th floor, and I stocked the vacuum cleaners and the typewriters and the books and the records, and but it was the large items that somebody would want a typewriter, and you'd go into the warehouse and you'd bring down 5 typewriters that were on sale, stock them, and so I had the whole 4th floor. And when the first cleanup came that I was there this particular summer, they had a meeting of the people that worked on the floor, and well, this is going to happen. You do this, you do that, and I said, well, what do I do? And they said, well, when the store opens, people are going to really come streaming through here. You stand at the top of the escalator on the 4th floor, and the escalator was frozen, so it served as stairs. You had to run up the steps. It didn't move you up. you stand at the top of the escalator and you pick up anybody that falls. And make sure they get, kind of like into the game, push them in. So that was my first experience with an actual cleanup. No one fell, but my heart was pounding. I'm standing there. You could hear them. It is 10 a.m. and Hess's is now open, and have a good day. That was the loudspeaker. And then all of a sudden, you could hear them coming. You could hear people running to get up onto the 4th floor or 5th floor, wherever they were going to go to get something. I guess like my uncle's brother did for the TV several years earlier. So the cleanup sales were legendary. Into the 60s then and beyond, there were 2 huge promotions that took place throughout the 1960s. And one of them was the flower show. And I'm not sure whose idea this was, Frank. I don't know if you know whose idea, probably Max Hess.
Max Hess's idea, yeah.
But, what a
definitely.
great setting to have a flower show on the 1st floor with the elegant chandeliers and the antiques that the Hesses owned from all over the world, and the marble and the glass and the mirrors. And it was a flash of brilliance because people came from New York, from New Jersey, from Harrisburg, from Philadelphia, from Atlantic City, and they came by bus. Busloads of people came into the store and filled it to look at the flowers. And many of these people thought, wow, what is this place? We never shopped here, and they spent some money there too, which was the real goal from the beginning. Zsa Zsa Gabor, Barbara Eden, Dorothy Malone, female actresses of the 60s that were well known and well liked, they opened the flower show. So they always had a ribbon cutting, and they had flowers from all over the world that were there. They had the people from the United Nations there one year. They had the governor's wife showed up, and it was a real spectacle. And it lasted, I'm going to say, from about 1962 to maybe 68 or 69, 6 or 7 years, something like that. The other event that occurred was the teen trip of a lifetime. And here what Hess came up with was, we're all about fashion in this store. We have clothing, and many women shop here. Let's select a teen. We'll run a contest, and we'll invite teenagers from the 6-7 county region in our market here to write an essay on fashion and good grooming, or that sort of thing. And they would be selected by a panel of judges, and they would win a trip to an exotic location. And this wasn't just an ordinary trip. This was a first-class trip. Everything was paid for. You stayed at the best hotels. You met celebrities. You met public officials. You went to concerts and operas, and it was an extravaganza. They went to London. They went to Paris. They went to Rome. And in case those 3 words ring a bell, offices in London, Paris, and Rome, that was one of Hess's slogans. If you were able to get that phone number and you called an office in London, somebody answered the phone and said, Hess's of Allentown. Same with Rome and same with Paris. So they weren't kidding when they paid somebody to answer the phone in those countries to do that so that they could live up to their advertising. So my father accompanied, and my father, Max Levine, Max Rosie, who was the Hess's New York PR man, he often went on these trips. And they brought along magazine editors and reporters from Ingenue magazine, Glamour magazine, those types of magazines, and then they would write stories about this young woman's trip of a lifetime. My father would take photographs every day. These would all be wired back to the United States. Maggie Levine would write a story, wired back, and the next morning people could hear, well, who did she meet? Well, she was in Buckingham Palace, or she went to the opera in Paris. And they went to Brazil, they went to Denmark, they went to Sweden and Denmark. They had a trip, they went to Hawaii. And so people in the Lehigh Valley followed this whole journal. Every day there was a double page of the center spread, and it showed a dozen photographs of these different young women experiencing their time in Europe or wherever they were going. And then when they came back, they got a job in Hess's because they were now mini celebrities, and they were the fashion coordinator, the teen fashion coordinator for the summer, and they would talk about the latest fashions, and they would then sometimes model in the patio and in the store the fashions that were on sale in the country that they went to. One year they decided to do a story on my father, And they wanted again, they ran these as ads. These weren't newspaper stories, they were advertisements, but they were made to look like a story in the newspaper. So they wrote, Maggie Levine wrote a story about him, you know, how he was in the 8th Air Force, and he was a photographer at the Morning Call. And it's a photograph of him standing with his cameras, his Rolleiflex, his 2 Leicas, his Nikon, and he's standing there like looking into the camera holding this, and behind him is Big Ben. Well, this was the first effort at photoshopping. If you Photoshop and know how to Photoshop on your computer, he knew how to do it in 1963, because the photograph of Big Ben was taken in London the week before, and the photograph of him was taken in our backyard on a hot summer day. And he cut himself out, he pasted them on, they just kind of brushed in the creases, and there he was standing in front of Big Ben. I still have the clipping. And because I walked out, I said, "What are you doing?" He's wearing a suit, and he's got the tripod set up, and he's got a little cable release, so he took the picture of himself. He's holding his camera, looking into it, and he pressed the cable release, and he took the picture. He said, "I'm taking a picture of me in front of Big Ben." And I said, "What?" And then I learned how that worked. But the trip that he used to say was the trip of missed opportunities from a photographic standpoint was the trip to London. They tried to have a meeting with the Queen to get to meet the Queen, and the Queen was in Scotland at the palace in Scotland at that point, so they couldn't. The Beatles, no, the Beatles were playing in Germany that week. They didn't get the Beatles. They did get to meet the Moody Blues, who became pretty popular, and they actually, the reporter from Ingenue magazine interviewed the contestant and the singers from that. But the other photographs, so my father said, I missed the Queen, I missed the Beatles, and then they went to the U.S. Embassy, which they often did. The congressmen would usually pave the way with the embassies, and they would meet the mayors. They met the mayor of London and these different people. And he said the photograph that he missed by pretty much minutes, they had just left the U.S. Embassy after meeting the U.S. ambassador, and they left to go wherever they were going. And Adlai Stevenson, the ambassador to the United Nations, pulls up in front of the embassy, gets out of his car, and drops dead on the steps of the embassy. That's how Adlai Stevenson died, and he, of course, was a nominee for president in the 2 previous elections, or in the 50s. And so he said, there I could have had 3 international celebrities, and he said, it just didn't work out. He never went anywhere without a camera. If he was here tonight, he would have a camera, even if it was in his pocket. And of course, he would marvel at the technology which we have today. And he passed away in the 80s, and he was kind of disappointed in his profession. And I said, well, why? Look what you've done. And he said, well, you know, everybody can be a photographer today. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, you can buy a cardboard camera in a drugstore. And I thought, oh yeah, that's right. You know, and you throw them away when you're done. That's the other thing. So he was sort of disappointed. But I think if he had lived a little longer and seen the technology and what you can do with computers, he would have realized that he too was involved in perhaps the golden age of photography in his time. Well, in the late 60s, Max Hess decides to sell the store to Phil Berman. Berman buys the store, and if Hess liked the TV celebrities and all the movie star personalities, Berman liked the artists and the politicians. And the Bermans opened a first-class gallery with really some international works. They had artists from around the world that came to Hess's and displayed their work. One of them was Françoise Gillot, who was Picasso's mistress, and she later married Jonas Salk of the Salk vaccine. And I don't believe she's still alive, but she was very good friends with the Bermans and often came to Allentown. The politicians included Jimmy Carter, Hubert Humphrey, Wilbur Mills, Senator Henry Jackson, Senator Birch Bayh, big names in U.S. politics in the 70s. And the great story about Jimmy Carter was that Jimmy Carter was at Hess's in the spring of 1976 when he was running for president. And if you've ever been around a presidential campaign, there are busloads of media people that follow a motorcade for a presidential candidate. Particularly at this point, Carter was catching fire, looked like he was going to get the nomination, so he was coming into the Pennsylvania primary with a good chance to win the nomination. So there were busloads of Associated Press and CBS, NBC reporters, camera crews, photographers. And as Carter was done giving a talk in the store, he toured the store, and then he met with a lot of community leaders at an event that was held, he decides to stop and shake hands with the Easter Bunny. And people used to say to me, well, is your father the guy in the store that takes pictures of the kids with Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny? I said, well, no, he has done a few of those, but he takes pictures of models, and he takes pictures of events that are happening. Well, so Jimmy Carter stops and shakes hands with the Easter Bunny. My father thought, well, this is a good one. He turns, he takes a photograph of Carter with the Easter Bunny. The following week, that photograph was in People magazine and indicated that Carter was at Hess's department store in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So again, there it was. So my father, all the PR people, they were trained, they understood, they knew this. He had photographs in the New York Times, in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the Chicago Tribune, photographs all across the country of events and things that were happening at Hess's at 9th and Hamilton. One politician that was not at Hess's, but many people would swear to the fact that he was there. Now, if you remember, there was a voice at Hess's. For many years it was a woman, and then there was a man. There were maybe 2 or 3 people that did this over a long period of time. Their voice was very distinctive, and people recognized them. And this was a story from the 50s that I was told about. And one afternoon, there's a number of people in the store, and the loudspeaker comes on, "Would Harry S. Truman please call the store operator? Would Harry S. Truman please call the store operator?" So there's people buying shirts, and all of a sudden they look up, and they're like, "Is Truman here?" You know. So people started looking for him. Well, it was a stunt, and Hess is sitting up in his office having a good laugh, knowing that people are really. So Harry wasn't there. I can assure you that did not happen. Harry Truman was in Allentown, but not at Hess's department store in the 1950s. So the Bermans took the store in a whole new direction. They kept up the promotions and the public relations, but they also knew that the downtowns were moving into a different period in our history, and it was time to branch out. So they built the South Mall and the West Mall, the Westgate Mall, and they teamed up with Crown American from Johnstown, and the Crown America with the mall builders, and Hess has always anchored these stores. And then they were sold, and Berman got out of it, and they went and purchased other department stores. They had when the store closed, they had store when they sold it to the Bonton. They had stores in New York, I think as far down as Tennessee and Virginia, and throughout Pennsylvania. So it became a regional chain, but it just wasn't quite strong enough to go on like Macy's and some of the others that survived over the years. So they took that route, and in the 1990s it was sold to the Bonton, and you know, we all know what happened then at that point. Bonton had it for a few years, and they decided that the downtown store just wasn't going to cut it, so they closed the store. They then changed the name, and they had their Bonton stores in the suburbs, but that's the one that survived, and the downtown store disappeared. I then played another role as president of the Allentown Economic Development Corporation. Here I was, now presiding over what do we do with this building. And Frank mentioned that when they purchased the hotel in the 1890s, they bought the building next to it, and then the building next to it, and the building next to it. In late 90s and around 2000, when we had prospective buyers and developers coming through here, they realized that, well, this is like 6 or 7 buildings, and it's all on different levels, and there's no heat in this building. And people said, no heat? No, because somebody used to come into the store at 5 o'clock in the morning and turn all the lights on, and that's how they heated the store for decades. There was no heat in that building. So there were really only 3 live projects at any one time to either reuse that building or replace that building. And the greatest concern that the city administration had was that somebody would cut a deal with the Bonton, and they would buy this store and they would turn it into a giant flea market, something that would be not what anybody wanted or anybody would go to. So the defensive measure was, let's buy it and then see where we can take it. So I had the privilege, I guess you could say, to personally negotiate the purchase of the building from the Bonton. Me and their vice president for real estate or sales promotion, whatever he was. And we hammered this out over a few days, and we paid the Bonton $1.5 million for the entire site, for the store, for the annex, for the pet shop and the buildings that they had on 9th Street, for the parking garage. We then brought Lucent Technologies in, and this was the first one. This is the one that everybody in Allentown wanted to get Lucent because they weren't looking to build a brand new office building. Well, they were the ones that came through, and they're the ones that discovered that there was no heat. They were the ones that said, you'll never be able to put a modern office building on this site because you've got steel in here, you've got timbers, you've got masonry. It's just not conducive to a modern building. And Lucent is cutting edge, the 21st century technology. We can't do this. So we were disappointed. And then the second proposal that at least for a year or so was very serious was local investors got together. They were going to purchase a minor league hockey team of unknown origins at the time, and they were going to put an arena at 9th and Hamilton. You remember this story as well if you lived here at that time. Well, we were able to, as a nonprofit, the Economic Development Corporation, we applied to the state government. There was all kinds of environmental issues. There was asbestos in the building. There was lead paint. There was underground storage tanks. There was all kinds of issues that needed to be dealt with environmentally. We were able to get grants from the state to do the environmental work. And then the decision was made that the arena people were going to go ahead. They identified their boundaries, and the decision was made to demolish the building. And people have told me, in fact, someone told me tonight, that they cried when that building came down, and so did I. It was my life, part of my life for 28 years. And I thought, I can't believe that I'm in the thick of this, and like, how did I get here? How was I chosen to be involved in this process? But we knew that this building held the key to any future development that was going to happen. It was a landmark site. The building was not usable for any high-tech building or any modern office building. So we went the arena route. Well, and we went the arena route, and we went the arena route. And eventually it came to the point where, okay, we demolished the building. We got a grant to demolish the building. We sold the parking garage to the parking authority. And now we have a pad, and this is what economic development organizations do. They provide a piece of real estate for somebody to develop. And our board meeting, when we made a decision to move to the next step, was show us the money. These people wanted an arena, they wanted a hockey team. They had a coach, but they didn't have a team, they didn't have a place to play. They had a guy from the Flyers who played for the Flyers for a number of years. So the bottom line was, they didn't have the financing, and they couldn't get the financing to build the arena. And just as well, because it probably wouldn't have lasted. It would have been, in hindsight, it would have been a mistake probably to go that route. So at that point, PP&L approached us and said, we would like to buy it, and we will develop a first-class office building on this site. So I bought the building from the Bonton, and then I negotiated the sale of the building to PP&L, and we have the 8-story office building that is there now. It is a green building. It is a state-of-the-art building that we had hoped Lucent would put up. And it looks like we're going to have our arena 2 blocks away down at 7th and Hamilton. So that was the story of Hess's department store, from the Hess family coming to Allentown to the demolition, and it was what, 96 years or 98 years?
Yeah, just barely, almost 100.
Just
right?
under 100.
Just under 100.
Just around 100 years. So it was a great institution, and for me, it was great growing up because we couldn't wait to hear the Hess's stories every night at the dinner table. So, thank you very much. We will answer questions too,
Sure,
if you
of course.
have any.
questions?
Yes.
I wanted to ask what impact you think Crown America's kind of fiasco in trying to develop a mall in the Drexler area, because everyone opposed it, and they handled it poorly. People cut their credit cards, their Hess's cards, and sent them back. That seemed like that was kind of the beginning of the end.
I really don't know a whole lot about the suburban stores. At that point, their growth, they were going everywhere, and I think maybe they were looking to recover some losses. I don't know what their books looked like worked in the finance or accounting office could probably answer that question better than I could as to what their business strategy was. But not everybody was in favor of the expansion of all of their range stores. Yes.
Do you have any books telling people about the Hess story? There's something about.
Yes, so we have two books that we brought along. This is the book that we have some back there. This is the Images of America, Arcadia Publishing. This is Hess's department store that Frank and I co-authored about 5 years ago, I guess, 2008. And this book is called Taking Pictures. This is a book of my father's work as a professional photographer. If you're wondering about any Hess's photographs, I once tried to have Jack Lay sell this in the bookstore at Lay's. And I said, well, just take it home, you take a look at it. And then I saw him later, and he said, you know what, it's just too much Hess's in here for me to sell it at Lay's. So you can keep the book, that's fine, thank you. So this is his book.
These are on sale back?
Yes, yeah, we have some, we have a limited supply, but we have them for sale tonight. And there, I think, are only 7 duplicates that you'll find in the ones that are in here that you'll find in this. So we tried to not use the same photographs in this book as were done in the first book.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, in the back.
Okay. Max Hess, he lived to be, what, about 57? I just wondered, was the stress of that, did it have anything to do with his short life expectancy? And also, did he see the writing on the wall that the malls and everything were taken over and he was living, it was pretty well, is that near the end, did he realize that it's just pretty hard to keep up?
There's all kinds of speculation as to exactly what was going through Max Hess's mind when he sold the store to Berman. I've heard a variety of stories. Irving Coleman, who I think was his attorney for a long while, supposedly told someone that I heard that from secondhand that in the late 60s, when there were the riots taking place in a lot of the cities, Max Hess got kind of spooked by that and suddenly decided, hey, maybe I want to try and sell the store now while it's still worth something, rather than hang on to it and have something like that happen to it. But that's just a rumor and speculation. I don't know if that's true. He did, after he sold the store, I heard he went down to Houston, Texas, and he was looking at the big indoor stadium down there. At that point, he was talking about investing in that and investing in this money that he got from Berman, investing in that property down there. But I think he came home from there, supposedly the story is, and he had like a brain hemorrhage and died. It is interesting that both he and his father died very young, in their late 50s. His father died of pneumonia in his late 50s, and Max, of course, died of his brain tumor in his 50s. But he was a man who lived life as he saw it, was very flamboyant, and was very strong opinions about a lot of things. So I think he was. He fit his era so perfectly. It's almost difficult to imagine Max Hess trying to fit into a big box store kind of world that we live in. That would the store and he were one, and it was a stage set for him. Today he'd probably be a major theatrical producer. He'd probably be running a television station. He'd be very much into that kind of thing. That's where I think he would fit in today, rather than. And he'd probably have his own talk show and this sort of thing. That's where he was. Yes.
I heard that I knew one of the buyers there, and the question was asked previously that they said that they were going to these areas in the South, and they had a completely different type of things that they would be buying, and they didn't know how to buy for all these areas that they, when they spread out with all these satellite stores. That's what this buyer told me that used to buy for Hess's.
Well, I think you've kind of touched on it in area of research that we don't know a lot about, but maybe we need to see the more recent history. What caused the ultimate demise? I think the sale from Hess to Berman came about in part, and what Frank said I think is accurate. But the word that that I received, and I think some of the Hess's people knew, was that Max Hess's son, Tommy Hess, was not interested in running the store. And at that point, I thought, well, he was the oldest. He had 2 daughters and a son. And I guess, look, the store's for you. Let's pass it on to the next generation. Studies show that transition from one family to the next in all businesses is very difficult. And he just really had no interest in
Didn't he, the talk was in Allentown that he knew that the developers were looking at that for a mall?
Yeah,
Didn't
that's
he buy it to keep the mall out?
died-
1968 or 69?
69, I believe.
died-
1968 or 69?
69, I believe.
It's gonna go north on 7th Street. And two guys from Harrison came in, and actually, my father used to, this is another story. Actually, as you ask questions, you're gonna trigger other stories that didn't make the book and didn't make our lecture, but he was asked to spy on two guys' prices. So he would go up there with a raincoat and have his little Leica underneath, with the strap up tight, so that it was barely peeking out of the jacket. And he'd go up and they'd have a pair of gloves on sale for $12.95. So he'd look around and he'd open up and he'd judge the exposure. There's no built-in exposure. He would take the picture, and he would come back, and this is how Hess would find out what's on sale. And he would go when they were promoting the sale, so he knew what was going to happen. And the next day, Hess sold those gloves for $10. So I think you're right on. It was he did all that he could to prevent retail from out of the area coming in. The Lehigh Valley Mall, the Whitehall Mall, and two guys. Well, Hess has lasted longer than two guys.
Did they let anyone, when the day that they destroyed the store, prior to that, did they let anyone take any of the marble or anything out of there? They're beautiful.
There were some things that were salvaged, and obviously all of everything was out of there that was taken out. But I don't know about the floors or the marbles. I don't know. That's a good question. Like you told us when we came in that there was marble just put in up in there. Yeah. I'm guessing that went somewhere. But I need to go back and look at our project manager and see. Do you remember if we sell the marble or what did we do? I don't remember. Okay.
I was fortunate enough that my grandfather was Ezra Groman from Groman's Bakery, and he had the bake thing right next to the food thing on the first floor for a while. And so I have lots of stories about Max coming to the house and everything. But I wondered, is there any place I tell my kids about it all the time. Is there any place to get the old, let's say, fashion shows that were on tape and the old flower shows when they did, every year they did them? Is there any way to get copies of those or anything?
Well, Channel 39, Frank, you involved with
Yeah,
Channel
Channel
39.
They just have a show.
They did
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, they just
had
have a
the-
show, but
Those the items are on film. They're deposited to the Lehigh County Historical Society.
so there's no way to get copies of the fashion shows or.
You would have to talk to Lehigh County Historical Society, and that's
Well,
in
and
their.
they had a partnership with Channel 6 in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they did a number of
I remember
fashion shows in
WPBI
Philadelphia.
and-
So those were
Larry
recorded.
Ferrari.
Yeah, those were recorded, and I don't know where those could be.
Yeah.
They may have kept some of that stuff, or it may be gone.
Try that.
A lot of the archives
I
disappeared.
know they put everything on DVD now, so I
Yes.
thought
Yeah.
it'd be kind of nice to have,
Yes.
because I have some of the toys
That's
from
a good question.
that they had on the shows and stuff, so.
I know at Christmas time, the Historical Society has been doing a Hess's thing every several years, and they
Yeah.
do run that over
Yeah,
and over
put
again.
them out and
tapes.
everything.
Let me go back with another quick story. You had asked about why did we sell the store, and I mentioned about his son not being interested. And my father told me this, and whether this is true or not, I don't know. But my father got a big charge out of this, that Hess sold the building for $18 million in cash, and Hess put it in a suitcase and took it home. And he said, "Can you imagine driving up 27th Street past our house with $18 million in cash?" And then that wound up in banks all over the country and in Europe and everything. And I guess maybe he didn't care because he probably had 18 million times 10 in other banks.
Yeah, well, maybe, there was something about that, I guess Max wanted it in cash, and he had to have it right away, and Berman had to come up with the money fast, and it was a Sunday, and Federal Reserve banks were closed.
Yeah, there was some financial maneuvering there. And I
Had
think it wound
the
up
cash
in the
carry
system.
on.
I don't know that for sure.
Yes, well, that's.
My daughter, being in college, and she worked, one of her jobs was working for Hess, and she was there up to the very end, when downtown, when they actually closed. And she had the fortune of being shown the underground tunnels by one of the maintenance men. And she told me where the secret passage door was, and all the clerks, and that's how
Hess got a lot of publicity and recognition for the store. And a lot of people, I think, probably maybe viewed him as rather selfish, but he was a very generous man, a very warm man on the inside for people that had some needs. There were people that worked in the store whose members of their family had medical problems, and he paid for them. He sent them to hospitals or to specialists in New York or Philadelphia so that they could be taken care of. There was a woman that worked in the, as I call it, you talk about it, the tunnels. We called it the sub-basement. It was way down underneath the store. And this woman, he was down there one day, and he found out that this woman didn't have a television set. And that day when she came home, there was a television set in her home. So he did little things like that for people that made a difference. And of course, it was all about the store, but he was a kind-hearted man as well.
We talked to Wolfgang Otto, who had done a lot of window displays for Hess's. And he told us a story. When he first came to work for Hess's, Max Hess, he hadn't seen Max Hess yet. He fairly recently arrived from Germany, got this job doing Hess's window designs. And he was doing them one day, and he was standing there, and he's got his back to the thing, and it's somebody that comes along, and he said, here's a voice suddenly behind him, and he looks at me, he says, Otto! He looks around, and he can't see anybody at first, and then see this little man in a ratty raincoat with glasses half askew, like this, and says, Otto, it doesn't belong there, it belongs over there! He turns around and walks away, and it says, Wolfgang, very meticulous man, but really, he turns to his assistant next to him and says, who is that man? Who is that man? Who is that man? He said, well, that's Mr. Hess. Oh, Mr. Hess.
So he moved it over to the other side.
Side, yes, the other side, right away, yes, exactly. But, yeah, he was, the thing that fascinated me about him, so that this is self-taught, intuitive, retailing, knowing what to do. He didn't go to Harvard Business School to teach him how to do this. He knew it by watching, by soaking this in. I'm sort of visualizing little Max Hess Jr. sitting around the store watching all this in like the 1930s and 40s. And see this watching it, the thing, seeing all this, and just envisioning it. And he also, as Kurt said, had this thing with movie stars. And one of the interesting things that I remember is from the early 50s. He had actually made some comment that he was the head of the Retailers Association of America one year, and he made a comment that Hollywood denigrated young women who worked in stores, and they portrayed them as not honest working girls like Patsy Kelly is in the movies, but somebody like, they have these glamour girls like Marilyn Monroe, and who in the movies, and I think that's not the image that we want for American young women. And Marilyn Monroe heard about this, and actually she was on the set of Gentlemen Who Prefer Blondes, and she heard about this, and she looked and she said, Patsy Kelly? Who? Wow. Believe it or not, the Associated Press picked this up, and Max Hess was associated with Marilyn Monroe's name in every newspaper in the country.
More questions? Yes.
This buyer that I knew, he was Italian, and he said that Max Hess trusted Italians. Did you notice any ethnic group having more power as far as administration at Hess's department stores that would indicate that there was a high percentage of Italians in administrative positions?
Who do we know, Frank, who was an executive?
I know there was
Sal, do you know?
one or two, but I think
Are you talking, you said that he had partiality?
partiality for Italians.
Was he partial to
He said he
Italian?
trusted Italians.
Are you
This guy was
talking
Italian.
about Joe Pachano?
Uh-huh. What?
Are you talking about Joe Pachano?
Yeah, Joe Pachano was a shoe buyer.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
So,
I
do
don't.
you notice, like, when you think of the administration under Max, was there a lot of high percentage of Italians? According to this guy, he just something, he trusted Italians. He wasn't Italian himself, obviously, but something that he
I
said
think
he trusted.
he may have looked at them as somebody, people who had a taste for certain kinds of shoes or dressing
But
or
it seemed
fashion.
like the way this guy mentioned it,
perhaps.
financially, he trusted them. In other words, they weren't gonna rip him off, you know, that's the impression I got off of this guy.
Okay.
Or he felt that way, that's the way he felt Max Hess felt. Now, he was Italian
these sundresses for $20 that women could buy, and they liked, to be able to look at the stuff, but no one ever bought those gowns, but it isn't part of the show.
It's like the
They bought
topless
other
bathing
dresses.
suit contest back in the '60s when they did that, and he ordered them, and nobody ever bought any of them. But boy, the Hesses had them, and they had you came to look at them, right? Exactly.
You had to have, Max has had a photographic memory. He would come in our department. We'd only ever see him maybe 4 times a year, but he knew if you were out of the most expensive thing and the cheapest thing, because he said we always had to have the most expensive and the cheapest. And he always knew what stock you had.
Well, and of course, he sent buyers, they didn't order everything from New York. The buyers went to Europe and they bought stuff. And that was part of it, the opportunity to go there and has paid for everything. And, you were supposed to spend money. In fact, when my father accompanied the team trip on the team trip of a lifetime, he got an expense account, to buy things for his family. I said, I want to make sure, I want his money back. You make sure you buy something for your son and your wife. And we would get sweaters and jackets and different things that would come. So he was generous in that way, but they bought things from around the world. That was another thing. This was Pennsylvania Dutch land back in the 50s. To be able to see something from Europe was fantastic. In the 60s, when the Beatles were about everything in the world, they had all the fashions that were the mod, M-O-D fashions, mod fashions, and they had all the Carnegie Street fashions where these English fashions were designed. They had all that in the store, and you could buy that. And that was the influence of the Beatles. Yes.
If I make mention of the pet store, does that unearth any memories out of your mind? That anything? I'll pass on one quick story. My father bought a woolly monkey from Hess's in 1963 when spider monkeys were rather common. Hess's carried a much more expensive breed, the woolly monkey, and my father bought it from the pet store, and Max has had it delivered to our farm, which is not far from the Lutz Franklin schoolhouse, in a limousine. Typical Max Hess.
No, I remember going in the pet shop, and that was part of your trip. You would see what the dogs in the window.
Well, he had that window outside the pet stop, and one time he had an electric eel, and that was the featured, unusual, an electric eel.
I doubt if anyone bought that. And then he would the toy department, and that was a place for people, and that was on the 4th floor. Remember, you had to go up the ramp to get into the toy department, and they would have these huge stuffed animals. Like life size and then some of giraffes and elephants, and they cost hundreds of dollars, but that was part of the experience to go there and see all of these things. And then the toy buyer that was there, he would buy the latest in electric trains, and he would go to Germany and buy the Fleischmann electric trains and HO train sets were popular in the 50s. This was the new gauge that Hess had them all. So the buyers were really up on cutting edge things that people wanted to see, but things you could find in New York or Philadelphia or Chicago, not in Allentown, except at his store. Any other questions?
I have a question, a fun story. My wife worked part-time at Hess's to help me pay my tuition through college. And I would go pick her up on Saturdays all the time, look around the store. And I'd see this same woman up there. Every time I went up there, she had a coat around her arm. And I said to my wife, that woman is here every day, the woman with the coat around her arm. And my wife said, she's here every day, she's the store detective.
I have a detective story too. My father said, you know that guy that you saw, we talked about, somebody, he referenced it for me, I knew who it was, and said, well, he got fired. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, he was one of the store detectives, but he spent too much time in the appliance department. He said, who was going to steal the refrigerator? And then so the detectives were being watched as well. He spent too much time in the appliances on the 4th floor. So you go after the little stuff. So yeah, they had a handful of detectives that were dressed as shoppers, and they were there while you're buying something. They were next to it, making sure you didn't slip something in your purse or your pocket. That's a good story.
What was the rule that if you caught somebody shoplifting, were you allowed to pick up and do something in the
so-and-so, please report to the second floor,
It'd be a code.
dress
You know how
department or
they-
whatever, there would be some
numbers.
signal so they would come.
Yeah, right.
Very good.
Right.
This gentleman worked at Hess, as he told us earlier, 17 years, 18,
22.
22, all right.
22. I worked for 20 years part-time at Westgate in the shoe department, and I've got two good stories, and if the gentleman doesn't have the camera on, I'll tell one of them. I haven't told too many people this one, and I won't go on record with one of them. But with shoplifters, they can get you for even concealing the merchandise like under a coat. If you steal something and put it under your coat and store security saw you, they could stop you for concealment. I know one time one of the security guards at Westgate caught a young man. He would steal something from the store. He would go in the men's room, because the Westgate store was a block building with a false ceiling. The guy would stand in the toilet, lift the ceiling tiles up over the toilet, stick the article in there, and come back a couple days later, go into the men's room, and if nobody was there, he'd lift up the ceiling tiles, take the item out of the store. Okay, but there's another good story. Your camera's off?
This is for the Historical Society.
There was a shoplifter that was arrested at Westgate, okay? And when they brought somebody shoplifting in, they would bring a policeman. The policeman would park on the side door, and he would come in. And I remember the security guard, his first name was Jack. He was an ex-Marine. He was taking this woman back to, there's a security room in the back of the store, back by the office, because they would frisk the person and see what else they had on them. And if a female shoplifter was caught, they had to have a female frisk them, and if it was a male, then Jack, the security guard, would check the person out. So the store manager at the time was a woman, so it was her job to go into the security room and frisk the female shoplifter. And when they took the female shoplifter back, the female shoplifter seemed awfully strong because Jack was walking behind her, and the woman had her hair in a ponytail. He was holding her hair by the ponytail, and his hand was on her back, and the policeman was next to him. So they got the woman back into the security room, and the store manager went back to frisk the woman, and this was a store manager. She was a very gruff woman, okay, and she didn't take anything from anybody, whether it was a customer or whether it was an employee. So they got the woman into the room, and the store manager frisked the woman, and she had the shock of her life. She found out that it wasn't a woman, it was a male undergoing a sex change operation. So the woman was female on top, but not on the bottom. So that's
We won't put that in our next.
no, that's no, and I won't go on record being quoted on that, but that's an actual story. And that's why the woman was so strong, because it was really a male, and it took two people to get her back to the security room.
Well, I use the term frisk, and I have a frisk story as well. During the 1976 presidential election, when Jimmy Carter was there, Congressman Udall, Mo Udall from Arizona, was also a candidate. He was in the primaries, and he came to Hess's department store. And anytime, after the Wallace shooting and the Robert Kennedy assassination, they laid down a whole new set of rules as far as the Secret Service was concerned, and all the candidates got some type of protection. So there were certain people in the store that were cleared to be right up next to the candidates and close up doing it. And one of them was my father, because he took photographs of the people that were there eating in, and he was given a lapel pin. So there was a handful of people in the store that had a lapel pin that was issued by the Secret Service, and they knew that, okay, this is a Hess person, they're okay to be here. So Udall is coming through the store, and he's on the escalator, getting on the escalator on the first floor to go up to the second floor, and then beyond. And my father thought, oh, this is great, we'll have a good shot right down the escalator, and all the glass on the side. This will be a really interesting picture of the store, and you can see the chandeliers in the background. So he's riding up the escalator backwards. He's going up this way. He's standing on the steps, and it's taking him up this way. Takes his camera up, and he's going to shoot down, because there's people in front of him. Udall is down here, so he's getting all these shots. It takes him five or six pictures. And while he's doing this, he gets frisked by a Secret Service agent that's right in front of him. So he was kind of proud of that story. There was also an issue of when they took one of the team trip winners to a nightclub in Salvador, Brazil. The mayor of Salvador told them that they would have a guide during their stay in Salvador, that you were going to this place for dinner and into a nightclub, and that you have my personal bodyguard will be with you.
when you said Max was so nice, I wanted to, my grandfather, we had just moved home with my grandparents with my mother, and Max had talked my grandfather into buying one of the new little remote controls with the track, with the cars and everything, and it didn't work, so he had called Max up on Christmas Day, and Max came down with a brand new one. And he sat down on the floor and played race cars with us. And he had an Italian vase one time. It came from Italy, a big one of those urns they sat on the things when you went up and down. And it had broken into pieces. And my grandfather liked to do jigsaw puzzles, so he had the whole thing put in a box and brought over to my grandfather. My grandfather put the whole thing together. And I still have it, but it's this huge vase that used to sit on the thing. Max used to do the funniest things sometimes. He was the sweetest guy.
He was.
Yeah.
I saw another hand that come. All right, well, any last call? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank